Congratulations, failure. We're finished. Ethan mocked me with his rich friends on my birthday. Their laughter filled the private dining room of Marcello's, bouncing off the marble walls like a cruel symphony. I slid my small gift across the table toward him, a plain black envelope, my movements calm, deliberate. Before you celebrate, I said evenly, you might want to explain to your sisters why their tuition disappears, to your parents why their house and cars vanish in minutes, and to your partners why the company dies before dessert is served. I stood up, and the panic began. 2 weeks earlier, when I had called my mother Eleanor crying, she'd asked the wrong question. What kind of man serves divorce papers at his wife's birthday party? She'd said. The right question should have been, what kind of woman spends 6 months secretly preparing to destroy everything her husband values while pretending to be the devoted wife he expects? The answer sat at the far end of that birthday table at Marcello's, me, Hazel Brooks Harrison, watching Ethan perform for his audience of sycophants, my hand resting on that envelope that would end his empire. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Do you understand how I got there? You need to understand the perfect illusion I had been maintaining for years. 2 weeks after that call with my mother, I woke up at 5:30 a.m., just as I had every day for 8 years. Ethan lay on his side of our California king bed, turned away from me even in sleep. The distance between us felt like an ocean. I studied his back for a moment, remembering when he used to pull me close in those hazy morning minutes before the world intruded. Now he clung to the edge of the mattress as though touching me might infect him with something. Our Westchester house was silent as I walked through the hallways. 5 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a 3-car garage filled with the symbols of success Ethan needed the world to see. The marble countertops were cold beneath my palms as I prepared his morning coffee with scientific precision. Ethiopian blend from a boutique roaster in Tribeca, ground for exactly 15 seconds, not 14, not 16, and water heated to precisely 195 degrees. I had learned the hard way that anything less than perfection earned me that frown he'd perfected, the one that said I had disappointed him again while the coffee brewed. I plated his breakfast on the Wedgwood china his mother Vivian had given us for our 5th anniversary. Egg white omelette with organic spinach, no salt. 1 slice of whole grain toast spread with exactly 1 teaspoon of almond butter, edge to edge. Fresh squeezed orange juice poured into the crystal tumbler placed exactly 2 inches from the plate's edge. The kind of details that looked like devotion, unless you understood they were terms of an unspoken contract where my worth was measured by my performance. At 6:45 a.m., Ethan appeared. His internal clock was as precise as everything else about his life. The charcoal Tom Ford suit fit his frame perfectly. The Harvard Business School class ring caught the morning light. He sat at the kitchen island without acknowledging me, eyes locked on his phone. The investor meeting is at 10, he said without looking up. Make sure you're there by 9:45 to set up the conference room. Of course, I replied, maintaining the neutral tone I had mastered. I've already prepared the presentation materials. What I didn't say was that I had also spent 3 hours the previous night debugging the algorithm that made those impressive returns possible. The Pythia algorithm was my baby, born from my doctoral work in computational finance at MIT, refined through countless sleepless nights of coding and testing. But in Ethan's world, I was just the woman who arranged the papers and served the coffee while he explained my work to rooms full of men who pretended to understand it. 3 hours later, I stood in Meridian Capital's glass-walled conference room, arranging leather portfolios at each seat, while Ethan tested the presentation clicker. 20 investors would arrive soon, men with more money than imagination. They'd never know that the mathematical models Ethan would present, the revolutionary predictive analytics that consistently beat market expectations by 12%, had all originated in my mind. Remember, Ethan said, adjusting his tie in the reflection of the Manhattan skyline, your administrative support if anyone asks. Let's not confuse the narrative. The narrative. That was what our marriage had become. A carefully constructed story where Ethan Harrison was the brilliant financial mind who had built Meridian Capital from nothing, and I was the fortunate wife who had married well. Never mind that I had written every line of code that powered our trading platform. Never mind that my algorithms could predict micro-movements in the market with uncanny accuracy. The investors filed in, shaking Ethan's hand with reverence, the kind reserved for men who multiply wealth. I stood by the coffee service, invisible as furniture, while Ethan launched into his presentation. He spoke of Pythia's refinements with the confidence of someone who truly understood them, though I knew he'd memorized my explanations like lines in a play. The neural network processes approximately 12,000 data points per second, he said, clicking to a slide I had designed at 2 a.m. the night before. Our proprietary machine learning model adapts to market volatility in real time. One investor, a sharp-eyed man from Connecticut named Morrison, raised his hand. How does the algorithm account for irregular trading patterns during after-hours sessions? Ethan's smile didn't waver, but I saw it, the brief flicker of panic before he replied. Excellent question. Let's table that for our technical deep dive next quarter. Now about those returns. I stood silently beside the coffee tray, my hand steady though my pulse thundered. I could have answered in 30 seconds. Instead, I refilled water glasses and pretended not to exist. That evening, we drove to Ethan's parents' home in Greenwich for our weekly family dinner. The Harrison estate sprawled across 3 acres of manicured perfection, the kind that whispered old money, even though Charles Harrison had earned his fortune in commercial real estate barely 2 decades ago. Vivian greeted us at the door, air-kissing her son and barely acknowledging me. "Hazel dear," she said coolly, letting the word dear fall like an ice cube into warm water. "You can put the wine in the kitchen. Dinner's set for 8. Inside, Ethan's sisters Olivia and Grace were already there with their boyfriends, both Ivy League law students from the right families. Conversation flowed around me, never to me, talk of vacation homes and investment opportunities, as if I had nothing to contribute. Olivia's engagement party is next month, Vivian announced proudly. The country club, of course. Senator Whitman's son deserves nothing less. How wonderful, I said. Can I help with? Charles Harrison cut me off with a booming laugh. Hazel, sweetheart, you just focus on keeping my son happy. Leave the party planning to women who understand these things. The women who understand these things. As if I hadn't been secretly managing their investment portfolios for 2 years, guiding them toward returns that funded this very lifestyle, they had no idea that their trusted financial advisor, the man Charles bragged about on the golf course, was forwarding every report to me for analysis and strategy. That night, after dinner, I lay awake replaying Charles's dismissive laughter while Ethan snored beside me. The clock read 3:47 a.m. when I finally gave up on sleep and went downstairs to make chamomile tea. The kitchen, dark and silent, felt different. Less like a stage where I performed and more like a space where I could think. I opened my laptop, intending to review code, but instead I found myself scrolling through photos of my mother on Facebook, Eleanor smiling among her book club friends in a modest Ohio living room. They looked genuinely happy, happier than I had been in years. And as the glow of the screen reflected off the marble countertops of a house that wasn't truly mine, I began to wonder what kind of woman I had become, and what kind of woman I might need to be to take it all back. The next morning, I performed my routine like a well-programmed machine. Ethan sat at his usual spot at the kitchen counter, scrolling through his phone while I set down his meticulously prepared breakfast, the same egg white omelet, the same orange juice in the crystal glass. I'd been thinking about my mother, Eleanor, who was scheduled for hip replacement surgery next week. She'd be alone in her small apartment in Ohio, struggling to move around with a walker. I need to visit Mom next week, I said, pouring his coffee. Her surgery is on Thursday. Ethan didn't look up from his screen. That woman still lives in a rental, doesn't she? At her age, that's embarrassing. That woman. Not my mother. Not the woman who raised me alone after my father died. Just that woman. My jaw tightened as I set the coffee pot down harder than I meant to. She's having major surgery, Ethan. She needs someone there. He waved his hand dismissively, eyes still on his phone. Then send money for a nurse. We can't have you disappearing to Ohio right now. The Goldman presentation is next week. Then he smiled, a real smile, at something on his phone. Not the polished grin he used for clients, but a private one. His thumb moved quickly across the screen, typing. When he realized I was watching, he locked it, face down on the marble. Actually, he said, pushing his chair back, I should head in early today. Caleb Whitmore is coming by to discuss some technical restructuring. The name made something cold settle in my stomach. Caleb Whitmore, the young consultant Ethan had been meeting lately, supposedly for strategy sessions. Before I could respond, Ethan had already gone upstairs to grab his briefcase. The garage door closed moments later, leaving me alone with the silence and the faint smell of his cologne. For the first time, I didn't clear the table. I just sat there, staring at the untouched breakfast, the neat perfection of the setup suddenly looking absurd. My reflection in the crystal tumbler looked like a ghost. 3 days later, I was in our home office running the quarterly backup for Meridian Capital. Ethan insisted that we keep personal copies of everything, just in case of server issues, he'd said, always paranoid about control. The external drives hummed as data transferred, terabytes of numbers, contracts, and code. Normally, I'd use that time to check for bugs or optimization opportunities. But this time a folder caught my eye, restructuring confidential Q3. I hesitated, then clicked. Inside were documents dated 3 weeks ago. The first file made my blood run cold. A draft press release announcing Caleb Whitmore as Chief Technology Officer of Meridian Capital. Not consultant. Not advisor. CTO. The next document, an updated organizational chart, placed Ethan at the top, Caleb directly below him, and 3 new partners filling out the executive tier. My name appeared nowhere. Not even in the footnotes. Then came the memo that changed everything. Operational Efficiency Initiative IT outline plans for streamlining operations by eliminating redundant positions. Redundant. 8 years of my work. The entire technical system I had built from scratch. And I was redundant. At the bottom of the memo, written in Ethan's sharp handwriting, were the words, "Implementation after Q2. Personal matter resolved." Personal matter. That was me. I was the personal matter. For a long moment I couldn't move. My hands trembled as I copied everything to a hidden partition on my personal laptop. Encrypted, invisible to his casual searches, I stared at the screen, my reflection overlaying the words that erased my existence. 2 days later, suffocating in that pristine house, I decided to get lunch at a small cafe near Meridian's office, just to breathe. The place buzzed with the usual financial district chatter. I had just ordered a sandwich when a familiar voice made me freeze. "Tara, over here." Julia's, or rather Tara Collins's, high, sharp voice. Ethan's secretary. She slid into the table behind me with another woman I didn't recognize. I stayed perfectly still, phone in hand, pretending to scroll, and quietly tapped record. "So the birthday surprise at Marcello's is all set," Tara said with a gossipy thrill. "Private dining room, 40 guests. Everything fancy." "Whose birthday?" the other woman asked. "The wife's. But that's not what it's really about. Ethan's finally ready to make the change he's been planning. You know, the situation we've all been waiting for him to handle." They both laughed. My stomach turned to ice. "The poor thing still brings him lunch every Tuesday like some 1950s housewife," Tara continued. "She has no idea what's coming. Everyone at the office knows about Camille. Everyone except her. Camille Davenport." The name hit me like a slap. "He's really going through with it?" the friend asked. "Oh, definitely. He's been moving assets for months. By the time she figures it out, there won't be anything left to fight over. Princeton boys always protect their money." They laughed again, sharp, glittering laughter. As if destroying a woman's life was a joke, I didn't finish my sandwich. I paid the bill and left, phone burning in my hand, every word recorded for an hour. I walked the Manhattan streets in a blur, the September air stinging my face as the puzzle pieces fell into place. The deleted messages, the early meetings with Caleb, the restructuring documents, the memo about redundancy, and now Camille Davenport. That evening, I sat in the car outside Meridian's glass tower for nearly 20 minutes before texting Dr. Nina Patel. We hadn't spoken in 2 years, but she responded within minutes. "Meet me. Tomorrow. 8 p.m., she wrote. Brooklyn. The Anchor Bar." The next night, I walked into a dim dive bar near the Navy Yard. A place so unlike the glittering world Ethan inhabited that I almost laughed. Nina looked exactly the same as I remembered her. Red hair in a messy bun, eyes sharp behind her glasses. She hugged me hard, then pulled back to study my face. "You look like someone who just discovered her house is built on quicksand," she said, signaling the bartender for 2 whiskeys. That I told her everything. The memo, the folder, the conversation I overheard, Ethan's distance, his dismissal, his contempt. She listened silently, nodding occasionally, letting me unravel years of fear and humiliation. When I finally stopped talking, Nina leaned back and exhaled slowly. "Hazel," she said, "this isn't just a divorce setup. This is asset stripping and strategic positioning. He's not just planning to leave you. He's planning to leave you with nothing, and make it look like you never contributed a single thing." She reached into her bag, pulled out her tablet, and showed me a few cases she'd investigated, different names, same pattern. "Men like Ethan don't just walk away," she said, her voice low. "They scorch the earth. They make sure that when you're gone, even the story of your brilliance doesn't survive." Her words settled over me like a cold mist. I stared at my untouched drink. "I built everything," I whispered. "I know," she said. "And that's why you're the only one who can take it back." That night, I drove home with Nina's words echoing in my mind. Men like Ethan don't just leave, they destroy what they leave behind. When I pulled into our garage at 11 p.m., Ethan was passed out on the leather couch in his study, 3 empty glasses of scotch on the table. The glow of his phone illuminated the name Camille on the screen. That I stood there, staring at the man who had built an empire on my code and was now planning to erase me from it. For the first time in years, I didn't feel afraid. I felt something else: calculation. That night, in the only room where I could lock the door, the guest bathroom, I opened my laptop, sat on the edge of the tub, and began planning. If Ethan was preparing to destroy me, then I would become the quiet, invisible force that dismantled his entire world, piece by piece, algorithm by algorithm, smile by smile. He would never see it coming. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Ethan snored softly from his study, where he'd passed out again, half-dressed, with his phone clutched loosely in his hand. The screen glowed once more with a message from Camille. I watched him from the doorway for a moment. Even in sleep, he looked smug. The kind of man who believed the world bent to his will. He had no idea the balance was about to shift. I carried my laptop into the guest bathroom at the far end of the house, the only room I could lock without raising suspicion. It was absurd, working from the closed lid of a toilet at midnight, but the symbolism wasn't lost on me. He had reduced me to a secret in my own home. I would use that same invisibility against him. I sat on the edge of the bathtub, laptop balanced on my knees, and opened a blank document. If Ethan was building a future without me, I would build an escape so intricate, so invisible, that he wouldn't even realize he'd lost everything until it was too late. Step 1. Create a shell. I'd learned all about offshore structuring while helping Charles Harrison minimize his tax obligations. I had built shell companies in Delaware, trusts in the Cayman Islands, and holding entities in Bermuda, all legal, all quiet, all very useful to people who like to hide wealth. Now I used that same knowledge for myself. The first entity, Nemesis Holdings Limited. I smiled faintly at the name. Nemesis, the goddess of retribution. By 3 a.m., there were 7 interconnected companies, each one perfectly legitimate on paper. Bermuda for the holding company, Cayman subsidiaries for the investment arms, a Delaware LLC to interface with U.S. operations. Each had its own registration number, tax ID, and trail of documents that would withstand casual audits. All were controlled by me, and only me, through encrypted passwords Ethan would never find. The opportunity to use it came sooner than expected. That Sunday we were at the Harrison estate for dinner, seated around the massive mahogany table that could have hosted a royal banquet. Vivian's diamond bracelet sparkled under the chandelier as she poured wine. Charles was complaining about rising mortgage rates. 7% on a jumbo loan, he grumbled. Even with our credit score, these banks are thieves. I looked up from my barely touched salmon. The idea hit me like crystal clarity. "You know," I said casually, "some of my MIT colleagues started an investment fund. They're looking for stable, low-risk opportunities, real estate-backed loans to established families. That sort of thing." Vivian's eyes, usually indifferent to my presence, flickered with interest. "Really? What kind of terms?" "Much better than the banks," I replied smoothly. "Maybe 4.5%. Flexible payment schedules. They prefer to work with people they can trust." Charles leaned forward, curiosity piqued. "Sounds almost too good to be true." "Not at all," I said. cutting another piece of salmon with deliberate calm. I could make an introduction if you'd like. Within a week, I was orchestrating the deal of a lifetime. The investment partners I invented had impeccable credentials, drawn from real profiles on LinkedIn and Harvard business directories that I created email addresses, registered domain names, and even used burner phones for verification calls. One of Nina's contacts, a friend with a convincing British accent, posed as one of the partners for a short call with Charles's lawyer. The documentation was flawless, dozens of pages of lending language that would pass any legal review. Hidden deep in subsection 47C was a single paragraph that would change everything. In the event of material changes in familial relationships of the primary borrower, full loan acceleration may be enacted within 7 minutes of notice. Charles's lawyer, an aging golf buddy who cared more about his weekend tea time than fine print, skimmed the paperwork and pronounced it better than most. The $15 million refinancing went through without question. The Harrisons toasted to their cleverness at dinner that night, smugly congratulating themselves on beating the banks. That I smiled quietly into my wine glass. They had no idea they'd just handed me the financial trigger to dismantle their world in under 10 minutes. But property was only the beginning. The real prize was Meridian Capital itself. During scheduled maintenance windows when the trading systems were offline for updates, I began to dissect the Pythia algorithm. It was like performing surgery on my own creation, carefully removing pieces of the system without killing the patient. Each component I extracted, data parsing, neural network logic, prediction modules, was disguised as a routine update. Ethan signed off on every authorization form I placed on his desk without reading them. Just technical stuff, he'd mutter, scribbling his signature while talking on the phone. He didn't realize he was signing away ownership of the company's most valuable asset, line by line, patch by patch. By the time I was done, Meridian no longer owned the technology that made it valuable. It was merely renting it from Nemesis Holdings, and the rental agreement included very specific clauses about what happened if payments stopped or contracts were breached. The irony wasn't lost on me. Ethan had always loved control. Now his empire depended on a woman he had deemed redundant. But I wasn't done. At our next family dinner, Olivia and Grace were complaining about the taxes on their trust fund distributions. I could help restructure them for better efficiency, I offered sweetly. You know about that sort of thing? Olivia asked, tone dripping with surprise. A little, I said modestly, not mentioning that my PhD included advanced coursework in financial modeling. The new structure I created looked brilliant on paper: lower taxes, higher yields, flexible access to funds. What they didn't notice was that their father, Charles, had to sign as guarantor for certain obligations tied to those very same property loans. It was all connected now. Property, trusts, assets, loans, a beautifully fragile web. One domino fell, and the entire Harrison dynasty would crumble. When Grace signed the documents, she smiled at me. "You're so sweet to help us, Hazel," she said. "Especially considering your background." My background, as if growing up middle class in Ohio was a disease. That I smiled back, sealing their fate with a flourish of my pains. By the time I was done, the entire architecture of their wealth was intertwined with my invisible network. Nemesis Holdings sitting quietly at the center like a patient spider. I had built an avalanche waiting for a whisper. 3 weeks later, the system was complete. Every contract signed, every trigger hidden, every pathway encrypted. On the surface, nothing had changed. Ethan still barked orders. Vivian still looked through me. Olivia and Grace still gossiped about their Pilates instructors. But beneath that polished world of privilege, the floorboards were rotting, and I held the match. The only person who sensed something was different was my mother, Eleanor. When she called one evening, she said softly, "You sound calmer lately, sweetheart." "I'm working on a project," I told her. "That's good," she said. "Just make sure it's one that builds you, not breaks you." She had no idea how right she was. 3 weeks had passed since I finished weaving the invisible web of Nemesis Holdings. The complexity of it had become my secret strength, but carrying that knowledge alone was beginning to crack the mask I wore in front of Ethan. Then one evening, my mother called with her usual warmth cutting through the cold emptiness of the house. "I'm coming to visit this weekend," she announced, leaving no room for argument. "Mom, you don't have to. I've already booked the flight," she interrupted. You sound tired, Hazel. A mother knows. When she arrived Friday afternoon, Ethan was still at the office as I opened the door, and she stood there with her old leather duffel bag, wearing that same faded denim jacket she'd had since my high school graduation. She took one look at me and pulled me into a hug that lasted longer than it should have. You've lost weight, she murmured. I've been busy, I said, leading her into the kitchen. The house gleamed like a showroom, marble floors, modern art, sterile perfection, but my mother didn't comment on any of it. She just looked at me, really looked, her sharp brown eyes seeing straight through every mask I'd learned to wear. We made tea and talked about her book club, her neighbor's new puppy, and other trivial things that filled the silence between what she sensed and what I refused to say. Then at 6:30, the sound of tires crunching on the driveway made me stiffen. Ethan was home early. Mom noticed the way my posture changed, how I smoothed my hair, straightened my blouse, and checked my reflection in the microwave door. Ethan walked in, the smell of expensive cologne preceding him. He gave my mother a perfunctory kiss on the cheek, barely a brush of air, and announced that he had a golf weekend with clients. He'd be leaving early Saturday morning, back Sunday night. The relief that flooded me must have been visible because the moment he left the next morning, Mom reached across the kitchen counter and took my hand. How long has he been this cruel? She asked quietly, not looking up from the eggs she was scrambling. The question hit me like a punch that I opened my mouth to deny it, but the words caught in my throat. I don't know what you mean. She turned, spatula in hand, eyes firm but kind. Sweetheart, I watched you flinch when his car pulled up yesterday. You apologize for the brand of tea in your own home. You're walking on glass, Hazel. That broke something in me. The dam opened and I told her everything, the coldness, the erasure from Meridian, the secret meetings with Caleb Whitmore, the restructuring memo, the overheard conversation about Camille, the upcoming birthday surprise. By the time I finished, tears blurred the granite countertop. Mom squeezed my hand, her voice steady. Your father had a first wife, she said softly. Before me. She waited too long to leave, kept thinking he'd change. By the time she got out, she'd lost everything. Not just money but herself. I swore I'd never let that happen to you. She stood, opened a cabinet and pulled out a small duffel bag. Come on. We're packing you a go-bag just in case. That afternoon we filled a suitcase with essentials, clothes, passport, birth certificate, some cash I'd been quietly withdrawing in small amounts for months. We hid it behind the old skiing equipment in the basement storage room, a place Ethan never looked. When you're ready to leave, Mom said, her voice trembling slightly, you call me. Day or night. I'll be here. I nodded, but part of me already knew I wasn't running. Not yet. The following Tuesday, I was working from home when the doorbell rang. A delivery man stood there holding an enormous bouquet of pink and white peonies. Extravagant, fragrant, and utterly wrong. Peonies, my least favorite flowers. I'd once told Ethan they looked gaudy and overblown. The card was small, cream-colored with gold trim. Can't wait for your freedom. For a moment I thought it was a mistake. Then I saw the florist's card attached. A sudden chill prickled my skin. I called the number printed at the bottom, forcing a cheerful tone. Hi. I just received a gorgeous bouquet, but I want to confirm the standing order for next week. Oh yes, Mrs. Harrison, the florist chirped. Mr. Harrison's weekly arrangement for Ms. Camille Davenport. Should we continue delivering to the Ritz-Carlton, Suite 1247? I gripped the phone tighter. That's perfect, I managed to say. Same time every Tuesday? Of course. He's been so consistent for the past 6 months. 6 months. While I'd been trying to save our marriage, Ethan had been sending another woman my least favorite flowers to her hotel suite. Suite 1247 every Tuesday. I wrote it down on a notepad with a steady hand, though inside I was screaming. 2 weeks later, Ethan insisted I accompany him to the Princeton alumni dinner. We need to present a united front, he said. Not noticing the irony, he positioned me at the wives' table in the corner while he held court near the bar, surrounded by investors and ex-classmates. I sat between a plastic surgeon's third wife and a hedge fund manager's girlfriend who couldn't have been older than 22. They talked about Cabo vacations and new handbags while I pushed salmon around my plate. Across the room, Ethan's voice carried above the hum of conversation. He was explaining my algorithm, the one I'd created during my doctoral years at MIT, down to the smallest detail, using the exact phrasing I'd once used to teach him how it worked. The laughter that followed was polite and admiring. "Are you proud of your husband's success?" the plastic surgeon's wife asked me with a patronizing smile. "I'm very proud," I said. My voice was steady, my smile perfect. But then I saw a face I hadn't expected. Professor Henry Alcott, my former advisor at MIT, he stood near the bar, glass of water in hand, watching Ethan with quiet understanding. Our eyes met, and he gave a subtle nod, a silent acknowledgement that he knew the truth. The man basking in applause wasn't the creator of Pythia that I was. That silent moment was more powerful than any public vindication. When the dinner ended, I rode home in silence while Ethan bragged about potential investors and future expansions. He didn't notice my hands folded calmly in my lap or the faint smile that played on my lips. That night, while he slept, I drove to the storage unit I'd rented months ago under one of my nemesis subsidiaries. Inside, bankers' boxes lined the walls, each one labeled, organized, containing evidence, financial statements proving the gradual erasure of my name from patents and contracts. Printed emails between Ethan and his lawyer discussing my phase out. The audio recording from the cafe where Tara Collins had laughed about the poor wife. It was all there, every thread of the tapestry I'd been quietly weaving. Now it was time to add the final detail. The trigger. Each letter, each data set, each legal notice had been pre-written, encrypted, and sealed in envelopes. When the moment came, all I'd need to do was hand Ethan the black envelope and watch his empire collapse. Within 7 minutes I closed the storage unit door, locked it, and stood in the cool night air. The sky above Brooklyn was clear, the stars faint but steady. For the first time in years I felt a quiet, absolute peace. My mother's words echoed in my head. "Make sure it's something that builds you, not breaks you." She'd been right again. I wasn't just rebuilding, I was rebirthing myself. And soon everyone who had ever dismissed me would witness the woman they had underestimated rise from the ashes of their arrogance. My 32nd birthday arrived like a countdown I had been hearing for months. That morning, Ethan hadn't said a single word about it. No card, no flowers, not even a polite happy birthday. Instead, he reminded me twice about the dinner that night at Marcello's. "Be ready by 7 sharp," he said as he slipped on his jacket. "It's an important evening. Dress appropriately." An important evening. For him it would be, just not in the way he imagined. At BY 4:30, I was home, and Ethan was already standing in our bedroom, studying 3 dresses he'd laid out across the bed like a director choosing a costume. That he turned as I entered. "Wear something sophisticated tonight. Not that black thing you always fall back on. We'll have important people there." My gaze shifted to the simple black sheath dress hanging in my section of the closet, elegant, unpretentious. The first piece of clothing I had ever bought with my own money before marrying him. I reached for it. "I think I'll wear this one." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Hazel," I just said. "It's my birthday," I interrupted, meeting his eyes in the mirror. "I should wear what makes me comfortable." A flicker of surprise crossed his face. Maybe calculation. He didn't expect defiance, not tonight, not when he thought I was walking blind into his trap. He shrugged, dismissing me, and turned back to his closet. "Suit yourself." As he dressed, I sat at my vanity applying makeup with steady hands. In the mirror, I watched him fasten a pair of new platinum cufflinks, small sapphires catching the light. I'd never seen them before. But the red Cartier box on his dresser told me everything. The same Cartier that Camille Davenport had flaunted on Instagram last month. "Nice cufflinks," I said lightly. "A gift from a client," he replied too quickly. "Closed the Whitmore deal." The Whitmore deal had closed 3 months ago. I didn't point that out. Instead, I reached into my laptop bag, retrieved the black envelope, and slipped it into my evening purse. Its weight felt heavier than it looked. 7 minutes of annihilation waiting for my signal. Precisely 6:30, we left. Ethan spent most of the 20-minute drive tapping on his phone, texting rapidly. I caught a glimpse of Tara Collins's name before he angled the screen away, probably coordinating the final act of my humiliation. Marcello's occupied the top floor of a boutique hotel downtown. When the elevator doors opened, laughter and clinking glasses greeted us from behind the frosted glass of the private dining room. Ethan placed his hand on my lower back, guiding me forward like a prop he owned. The room was dazzling, 40 guests, golden light, the faint hum of a string quartet. And every single face belonged to his world. Princeton classmates, Meridian partners, wealthy clients, their polished wives and girlfriends. Not one of my friends. Not even an acquaintance from MIT. This wasn't a birthday celebration. It was an execution. My public degradation wrapped in crystal and linen. The seating chart said everything. Ethan's place card sat at the head of the table. Mine was at the far end, near the younger wives, as though I were an afterthought, but the true insult sat beside him, Camille Davenport, name printed in elegant calligraphy. Seated at his right hand, she was already there, radiant in a white dress that shimmered under the light, laughing at something Caleb Whitmore whispered to her when our eyes met. She looked away first. "Happy birthday, Hazel," Vivian said with her trademark air kiss, her smile brittle as glass. "You look understated." "Thank you," I said evenly, moving to my assigned seat. The meal began. Champagne flowed freely. I caught glimpses of people glancing at me, whispering behind raised glasses, then pretending not to look when I met their eyes. Tara Collins smirked from across the table, lifting her glass in a mock toast. I smiled back. Just wait. 7 courses followed, each more elaborate than the last, and yet I couldn't taste a single bite. Ethan, meanwhile, commanded the room with his stories of financial victories and elite connections, his hand occasionally brushing Camille's as if by accident. To anyone else, it looked like charisma. To me, it was the prelude to his downfall. Then dessert arrived, an ornate chocolate soufflé with a single candle burning in the center. Ethan stood, glass in hand, tapping it gently with a silver spoon. "Before we toast to Hazel's birthday," he began, his voice smooth, self-satisfied, "I have an announcement to make." The room went quiet. I could feel 40 pairs of eyes shift between us, anticipation humming like static. Ethan smiled, the smile that had once fooled me, the one that hid knives behind charm. "Congratulations, failure," he said clearly. "We're finished." For a moment, silence hung in the air, the kind that sucks the breath from a room. Then laughter erupted like champagne shaken and uncorked. His Princeton brothers cheered. The wives giggled behind manicured hands. And Camille, in her perfect white dress, actually applauded. I didn't flinch, I didn't cry, I didn't give them what they wanted. Instead, I rose slowly, every movement deliberate, the silk of my black dress whispering against the floor. I walked the length of the table. The laughter faded, curiosity replacing mockery as 40 heads turned to watch. When I reached Ethan, I placed the black envelope on the marble tabletop in front of him. My voice was calm, my tone almost kind. "Before you celebrate," I said, "you might want to explain to your sisters why their tuition disappears, to your parents why their house and cars vanish in minutes, and to your partners why the company dies before dessert is served." The silence that followed was absolute. Ethan's smirk faltered. His hand hovered over the envelope, hesitating. For the first time in years, I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Feared. I leaned in slightly. "Enjoy the soufflé," I whispered. "You have about 7 minutes." Then I turned and walked away, heels clicking softly against marble. Behind me came the sound of paper tearing as he opened the envelope. I reached the elevator just as the first phone buzzed. Then another. And another. By the time the elevator doors slid closed, chaos had erupted upstairs through the frosted glass. I caught a final glimpse of Ethan's father shouting into his phone while Vivian clutched her pearls, eyes wide with horror. The elevator descended slowly, each floor passing like a heartbeat. When the doors opened to the lobby, the noise from above had turned into an uproar. Outside, the cool night air greeted me like an embrace. I crossed the street to where my Tesla waited, slipped inside, and opened my laptop. The dashboard came alive. A symphony of cascading confirmations. Loan acceleration notices sent. Trust funds frozen. Trading servers locked. System access revoked. Through Marcelo's towering windows, I could see the pandemonium spreading. Charles pacing with his phone, shouting. Vivian spilling a glass of champagne. Camille standing frozen beside Ethan, her perfect composure finally cracking. I watched the scene unfold with detached serenity, the city lights reflecting off the windshield like stars. Ethan had always said perfection was control. He never realized true control comes from knowing exactly when to let go. I closed my laptop. and started the car. As I drove away from the glittering chaos, I didn't feel guilt, only peace. For the first time in years, the silence around me wasn't suffocating, it was freedom. I drove through the quiet streets of Manhattan, leaving behind the chaos I had orchestrated. The city lights blurred through my windshield like slow-moving fireflies, and for the first time in years, I wasn't in a hurry to be anywhere. When I reached my brownstone in Brooklyn, a 3-story brick haven purchased 14 months earlier through Nemesis Holdings, the world above me was still unraveling inside. The air smelled faintly of bergamot and cedar. I set my laptop on the kitchen counter and opened the monitoring dashboard I'd configured. The screen came alive instantly, cascading with real-time data and confirmation messages. Meridian Capital's trading servers offline, Pythia algorithm locked, access attempts denied, trust accounts frozen, Harrison property foreclosure initiated. Every command had executed flawlessly. Through Marcello's floor-to-ceiling windows, I imagined Ethan still standing at that table, his voice cracking while investors and family members screamed at him for explanations. By 8:54 p.m., 7 minutes after I'd handed him the envelope, Meridian Capital systems had gone dark. The backups had tried to engage, but my biometric encryption stopped them cold. Client portals now displayed random languages, Mandarin, Swedish, Arabic, rotating every few seconds. A small, unnecessary touch of chaos I had added simply because I could. My phone vibrated beside me, lighting up with missed calls. 47. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat in the living room. The silence was profound but not empty. It was victory breathing quietly through the walls. 3 days passed in that calm. Each morning, I watched the financial world react to Meridian's collapse, watching numbers shift on screens as panic rippled through boardrooms. Emails poured into my inbox, angry, desperate, pleading, Ethan, Charles, even Vivian. Each message was another crack in the empire that had once treated me like furniture. On the 4th morning, my doorbell rang at 6:43 am. Through the security camera feed on my phone, I saw Ethan standing on the steps. He was unrecognizable. His once perfect Armani suit was wrinkled and stained, his tie loose around his neck. The confident posture he carried everywhere had collapsed into a slump. Even his signature Princeton ring was missing from his finger, probably pawned for quick cash. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. He stood shivering slightly in the cold autumn air. "Please," he said. The word sounded foreign on his tongue, like something he'd never practiced saying. I held my coffee mug loosely in my hand. "Please what, Ethan?" He swallowed hard. "The company is gone. Everything's frozen. My parents are losing their house. Olivia and Grace can't pay their tuition. The SEC is investigating me for misrepresentation of assets." His voice cracked. "Just tell me what you want. Tell me how to fix this." "You can't fix this," I said simply. "You can only live with the consequences, just as you expected me to." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a crumpled envelope, extending it toward me. "My lawyer told me to give you this." It was from Fuller and Associates, a law firm famous for expensive theatrics. I opened it slowly, flipping through 23 pages of legal threats. Accusations of theft, extortion, intellectual property fraud, emotional abuse. I couldn't help smiling. "This is impressive," I said lightly. "Desperation in legalese." Ethan's jaw clenched. "This isn't over. My lawyers will destroy you." "Of course they will," I said, and began closing the door. "You should go before the paparazzi realize where you are." He hesitated, eyes wild. "Hazel, please. I'm begging you." "Begging," I repeated softly. "That's new." Then I shut the door in his face. The thud of the latch echoed through the brownstone like punctuation on a sentence years in the making. That afternoon, I forwarded the packet to Catherine Langford, my attorney at Blackstone Legal. Within 2 hours, she sent her response. A meticulously crafted document attaching patents, contracts, and time-stamped records proving that I owned every line of code Meridian Capital had ever used. She also included an audio transcript of Tara Collins gossiping about Ethan's plan to cut me out after securing investors, and the emails between Ethan and Caleb Whitmore discussing my termination. Every accusation from Fuller and Associates had just become evidence of Ethan's attempted theft of intellectual property. Catherine's final sentence in her response made me smile. My client looks forward to your public retraction within 48 hours. The next day, my doorbell rang again. This time, it wasn't Ethan. It was Camille Davenport. She wore jeans, a cream sweater, and no makeup, so different from the pristine, polished woman who had sat beside my husband in her white dress at Marcello's. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. Her hands trembled slightly as she spoke. I'm not here as Ethan's anything, she began. I'm here because I've been collecting evidence. He used my access at Goldman to obtain insider information. Trade records, emails, everything is here. She held out a flash drive. I studied her face. Why bring this to me? Because he ruined my career the same way he tried to ruin yours, she said quietly. The only difference is you fought back. I nodded slowly, taking the drive. I appreciate it. But I don't need an alliance. Camille hesitated. Then what will you do? I already have everything I need, I said. Then I handed her a small white business card. This is Samuel Cho, the SEC investigator handling the case. He'll want your statement. She blinked in surprise. You're not going to use this against him yourself? I don't have to, I replied. The truth works faster than revenge. Camille nodded once, slipped the card into her pocket, and left as the door closed behind her. I returned to my laptop, where another dozen system alerts confirmed what I already knew. Ethan's world was dissolving in real time. The following morning, Catherine Langford called. The Meridian board has requested an emergency meeting tomorrow, she said. They've realized everything ties back to Nemesis Holdings. They're asking for your presence. Not as Ethan's wife, I said. No, she replied. As the controlling owner of their infrastructure. I looked out the window toward the skyline where Meridian's office tower glittered in the morning light. Then let's give them what they asked for. That night I barely slept. Not from anxiety, but from the strange calm of inevitability. It was all finally aligning, the lies, the erasure, the humiliation. Ethan had mocked me for being invisible. Tomorrow I would show him what real power looked like when it stepped into the light. The next morning, I woke before dawn. The sky outside my Brooklyn brownstone was a deep, bruised gray, streaked with the faintest hint of gold on the horizon. I brewed a cup of black coffee and stood at the window, watching the city slowly stir to life. Today would be the day I stopped being invisible. I dressed in a navy suit. Not designer, not ostentatious, just sleek and precise. The kind of outfit that whispered authority rather than screamed for it. The heels were practical, the jewelry minimal. I wanted the power to come from my words, not the shine on my wrist. At BY 8:30 a.m., I was standing in front of the Meridian Capitol building, the same glass tower where I had once served coffee to investors who never remembered my name. Now my name controlled everything inside those walls. The receptionist's smile faltered when she saw me. Mrs. Harrison, she stammered. Miss Brooks, I corrected gently. Tell the board I'm here for the 9 a.m. meeting. A few minutes later, I stepped into the same conference room where Ethan used to command attention with his fake confidence. 7 board members sat around the gleaming mahogany table, their faces drawn and sleepless. Ethan was there too, hollow-eyed, gaunt, and stripped of all his former polish. Beside him sat Caleb Whitmore, whose carefully gelled hair couldn't hide the panic etched into his expression. Charles Harrison occupied his usual seat at the end of the table, clutching a sheaf of papers like a lifeline. For a brief moment, none of them spoke. They just stared, perhaps realizing too late who truly held the reins. I didn't take the chair they had prepared for me at the far end. Instead, I walked to the presentation screen, set my laptop down, and connected the HDMI cable with a quiet click. The first slide appeared, a clean white page displaying a single title in bold, Ownership Structure, the Pythia Algorithm. Good morning. I began, my voice calm but firm. You called this meeting to discuss your technological crisis. Let's clarify the situation. I advanced the slide. It revealed a flowchart, dozens of legal entities interconnected by lines that converged on one name at the top. Nemesis Holdings Limited. Every line of code Meridian Capital relies on, every function, every neural process, every proprietary model, is owned by Nemesis Holdings, I said. And Nemesis Holdings is wholly owned by me. The silence was suffocating. Ethan shot to his feet. That's impossible. Meridian owns. Meridian owns nothing, I interrupted smoothly. You've been leasing your entire infrastructure from me since the moment you signed those routine technical agreements last quarter. I'd be happy to show you the contracts. Another click. The screen filled with scanned documents, each bearing Ethan's signature. Caleb leaned forward, pale. These look like vendor agreements. They are, I said. Except the vendors are all subsidiaries of Nemesis Holdings. You authorized the transactions yourself, Mr. Whitmore. Ethan's face drained of color. You tricked me. No, I said evenly. You ignored me. There's a difference. I clicked again. The next slide displayed a timeline of patent filings, each registered under the name Hazel Brooks years before Meridian Capital even existed. I created the Pythia algorithm during my doctoral work at MIT, I continued. The patents were filed under my maiden name. You simply commercialized my invention. One of the older board members, Marcus Webb, cleared his throat. What do you want, Ms. Brooks? I met his eyes and smiled slightly. 2 options. I advanced the slide again. Option 1. Recognize me as the founder and majority owner of Meridian Capital. I will assume 70% equity, you retain the remaining 30. Ethan keeps 5. Gasps rippled through the room. Option 2, I continued. I sell the technology to quantum partners for pennies on the dollar. Then you can explain to your investors why their portfolios are now worthless. Ethan slammed his hand on the table. This is extortion. No, I said softly. This is capitalism. I own something you need. I'm simply offering it to you at a fair price. Across the table, Vivian's husband, Charles, looked as if he might collapse. Olivia and Grace's tuition accounts had already been frozen. Their father's empire was crumbling. He knew I had them cornered. The board members exchanged panicked glances. Marcus Webb leaned forward again, voice tight. We'll need time to discuss this privately. Of course, I said, closing my laptop. You have 1 hour. My attorney is waiting in the lobby with the contracts. Then I left the room without another word. Downstairs, I found a small cafe across the street. I ordered a cappuccino and sat by the window, watching the building across from me. Every few minutes, a new messenger rushed inside. No doubt lawyers and advisors summoned in desperation. I sipped my coffee and waited. Exactly 1 hour later, my phone buzzed. A text from Catherine Langford. Contracts signed. It's done. I walked back across the street, through the revolving doors, past the marble lobby where I had once felt small. The security guard straightened as I passed. People who didn't know who I was before whispered my name now. When I entered the boardroom again, Ethan was gone. The others were standing, waiting. Marcus Webb stepped forward and extended his hand. Congratulations, Ms. Brooks, he said quietly. Or should I say, welcome home. I shook his hand. I prefer Hazel. That afternoon, the Wall Street Journal broke the story. The ghost genius behind Meridian Capital. The article spread like wildfire across the financial world. The reporter Susan Chin had done her research. She interviewed my former professor, Henry Alcott, who confirmed that I alone had created Pythia. She traced every major success at Meridian back to the same source, me side by side. The paper ran 2 photos. One from my MIT graduation showing me beside Professor Alcott and the early framework of Pythia, and another from last year, of Ethan presenting that same algorithm on stage at a finance conference. The caption read simply, same code, different name. Overnight, the narrative flipped. The world that once saw Ethan Harrison as a genius now recognized him as a thief. Interview requests poured in from CNBC, Bloomberg, and Forbes. I declined them all. I didn't need to speak. The truth was speaking for me now. By week's end, I'd leased 6 floors in the same building, just 6 stories below Meridian Capital's dying offices. The new company name glowed softly on the glass doors. Athena Financial. I had already assembled my team. Dr. Nina Patel, my friend from MIT, now head of analytics. Jessica Martinez, a risk modeler whose algorithms had been credited to her male supervisor. Amy Patterson, a developer whose innovations had made millions for firms that refused to promote her. When we stood together in our new office overlooking Central Park, Nina lifted her coffee mug. "To the overlooked," she said, smiling. "And to the underestimated." I raised mine. "And to the ones who stop waiting for permission." Outside, the city hummed below, alive, electric, endless, and somewhere far above us, in those fading offices, Ethan Harrison was watching everything he once owned disappear from his grasp. I wasn't the invisible wife anymore. I was the woman who had taken back everything they'd stolen and built something greater from the ashes. 6 months later, Athena Financial had become more than a company. It was a movement. Our models were outperforming every projection. The systems I had built in solitude now thrived under collaboration, refined by minds as sharp and hungry as mine. Every day, the office hummed with energy, women laughing, debating, coding side by side, and no tension, no posturing. Just brilliance at work. That first client presentation still played in my mind sometimes, the moment Hartman Industries signed a 3-year contract worth $2 million annually. They had said they wanted to work with the actual creator of Pythia, not someone who stole it. By the end of our first quarter, Athena's performance had surpassed Meridian Capital's best year by 30%. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Ethan's empire crumbled above, ours was rising beneath his feet. In the very same building, word spread quickly through the financial world. Soon, women from everywhere were reaching out, coders, economists, analysts, each with stories that mirrored mine. Dr. Lisa Chung, whose machine learning models had been published under her supervisor's name. Rebecca Torres, a Harvard MBA whose strategies had been credited to her male colleagues. Maria Petrov, a programmer paid half of what her junior male co-workers earned. I hired them all. Within months, Athena expanded to occupy the entire floor. We kept our culture simple. Ideas were credited by merit, voices were equal, and no one would ever be invisible again. That autumn, I was invited to deliver the keynote address at the Financial Innovation Conference in Chicago. For years, I'd been the woman who poured coffee for the speakers. Now, I was the one people came to hear. I wore the same black dress I had chosen for my birthday at Marcello's, the one Ethan once dismissed as boring. It fit perfectly, elegant in its defiance. As I stood backstage adjusting the microphone, a familiar profile caught my eye across the convention hall. Ethan, he was manning a booth for Brennan and Associates, a second-rate firm that handled municipal bonds and retirement portfolios. His expensive Tom Ford suits were gone, replaced by cheap polyester that strained across his shoulders. The Princeton ring had disappeared, and his hair was thinning under the harsh fluorescent lights. I watched him for a moment as he spoke to a potential client who looked thoroughly unimpressed. Then his eyes met mine across the room. For a brief instant, time froze, recognition flickered in his gaze, followed by something I never thought I'd see from Ethan Harrison. Shamed, he looked away first. The man who had once mocked me as a failure couldn't even meet my eyes. When my turn came, I stepped onto the stage to a packed auditorium of 500 professionals. I spoke about algorithmic innovation, about integrity in finance, about the unseen labor that built industries. When someone asked during the Q&A about my journey from MIT to Athena, I told the truth simply. I learned the hard way that if you let others own your work, they will own your worth. So document everything. Protect your ideas. And never let anyone make you invisible. The audience rose in a standing ovation. It wasn't applause for revenge, it was for reclamation. 2 months later, I used $10 million from the Quantum Partners deal to establish the Nemesis Foundation. The name was intentional, a reminder that justice doesn't always come from courts. Sometimes it comes from women who refuse to stay quiet. The foundation provided legal aid, funding, and mentorship for women whose intellectual property had been stolen or buried under someone else's name. Professor Henry Alcott agreed to serve on the board. Our first grant went to a young coder in Seattle whose innovations had been patented by her supervisor. The second supported a team of 3 women whose startup had been crushed in a hostile takeover that claimed their technology as existing corporate property. Within 6 months, we were supporting 27 women nationwide, each one rebuilding something extraordinary from the ruins of injustice. The stories they told in their applications reminded me why I had survived all of it: humiliation, betrayal, erasure. Because what had broken me once had now become a blueprint for others to rebuild stronger. One evening, I stood in my office overlooking the Hudson River. The city glittered beneath me, Reflections of light dancing across the glass walls of Athena Financial. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. The message was short. You destroyed everything. No name. But I didn't need one. That I looked at the screen for a moment, then opened my camera and took a photo of the framed Forbes feature on my desk. Athena Financial, one of America's top 10 most innovative firms. I sent it as my reply. Then I deleted the message and blocked the number. He was right. In a way that I had destroyed everything that had been built on lies, arrogance, and stolen genius. But from those ashes, I had built something infinitely better. That weekend, I called my mother. She answered on the first ring. Hazel, sweetheart. I was just thinking of you. Mom, I said, smiling. There's an apartment for sale in my building, 2 bedrooms, view of the river. It even has a reading nook for your book club meetings. Oh, Hazel, she said, her voice soft with disbelief. I couldn't possibly afford that. I can, I replied. We can. You've supported me through everything. Let me return the favor. There was a long pause on the other end, then a quiet sound I hadn't heard from her in years. A happy sob. As I listened to her cry, I felt tears sting my own eyes, not from pain or exhaustion, but from pure, uncomplicated pride. The next day, as the office buzzed with conversation and laughter, I stood in front of the glass doors bearing the name Athena Financial. The letters gleamed in the sunlight behind me. Nina was reviewing data models with Jessica, while Amy and Maria worked side by side. At their terminals, every woman here had been underestimated once, and every single one had turned that dismissal into fire. I smiled, remembering what Ethan once said. You're just an accessory to my success. Now I was the architect of my own empire. The irony was delicious. As the sun set over Manhattan, I realized that the best revenge wasn't making Ethan suffer or watching his downfall splashed across headlines. It was standing here, surrounded by women who had built something extraordinary, something born from truth, not deceit. It was knowing that his betrayal had become nothing more than a footnote in my story. Ethan had thought he ended me that night at Marcello's. Instead, he had freed me to write a better one. When the last light in the office dimmed, I lingered by the window, watching the city sparkle below. The skyline stretched endlessly, alive, untamed, full of possibilities. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new clients, new ways to grow. But tonight, for the first time in years, I felt completely, utterly at peace. And as I turned off the lights and walked toward the elevator, one thought echoed in my mind, the mantra that had guided every step since that night of humiliation. Never let them make you invisible again. Thank you for following this story till the end. If you found this an emotional journey of betrayal, justice, and inner strength, please help RevengeAmy reach its first 1,000 subscribers. Just a like and subscribe. Your support will be a great motivation for us to continue bringing more inspiring stories. Click subscribe today and be a part of this journey. See you in the next stories.